Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I'm so happy to have Paula Derrow with us. She is a writer and editor who spent the first 30 years of her career at glossy magazines, including as articles director at Self. She is now the features editor at The Persistent, a feminist newsletter that puts women's stories at the center. Her work, which focuses on ghost editing, as well as health, psychology, personal essays, profiles, and social issues, has appeared in the New York Times and other national publications. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited to talk about The Persistent. It's a pretty new publication. And can you talk a little bit about its history and how it became what it is?
So we're just coming on our second year. I've been with The Persistent since June. It was started by Francesca Donner, who spent a lot of her career at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Quartz, Bloomberg, and at the Journal and the Times in particular, she was in charge of columns that were very women-centered. And I think what she found ultimately was that it was really an uphill battle to get stories either written by women or where women were the main thrust of the story. And she just, at the end of it, she was like, I'm going to start my own thing. So that's why she started it, I think, with some of the frustration she experienced at some of these mainstream publications, getting women front and center. And that's what The Persistent does with a decidedly feminist bent, which I really love. Because I feel like these days, feminist has in some ways become a dirty word like feminazi and things like that. And we are very proudly feminist. We're funny, very voicey, not afraid to be political in these difficult times. So it's kind of a dream job. After all my years of working at Condé Nast and Hearst, I feel like this tiny little publication and this opportunity just fell into my lap. And it's just this small team of super smart women. Some are based in London, some are based in the United States. It has a very global perspective, and it's like my dream job.
That's fantastic. Well, someone who also worked in glossy magazines, I remember that time. Can you talk about your role there and what you do?
My title is features editor. As I said, we're a pretty small staff. I am really an old school long form editor, which I don't think you find that very much these days, especially in the digital realm. Francesca is that kind of editor too. It's not editing by committee as it often was at women's magazines, but we really will often take a deep dive and go back and forth with writers a couple of times. And so I assign to writers. It's so much fun because I'm assigning to a lot of the writers that I used to work with when I was in magazines, who I love so much. And I come up with ideas, people pitch me ideas. We also have writers on staff, I edit them. So it's really old school, deep dive editing, working with the writers, going back and forth. And people seem really appreciative to be getting that kind of attention on their stories. Another thing also is that almost every story gets its own piece of beautifully illustrated art. And we also pay the illustrators as well, which I think, again, is pretty rare.
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up on my phone and I saw this beautiful piece, The Women Bringing Witchcraft into the Workplace. And you have this gorgeous, people could see the illustration of the tarot cards. And the idea is, women bringing witchcraft into the workplace. I think back when I worked in magazines, I'm sure same with you, that was kind of a hidden thing. You didn't really bring the idea of witchcraft or the idea of magic into the magazine.
Or into the corporate world. That's what's pretty interesting, that some of these career consultants are using things like tarot, which are really a tool for people to reflect and think about what they want to do next. And so the cards can bring up certain things, ask certain questions, cause you to ask certain questions. What does this make you feel? What does that make you feel? So it's not totally magic. They use it as a tool for reflection often.
I see. So like a spiritual guide, like a rune or something.
Exactly.
So what about a pitch excites you?
Well, I feel like we are definitely looking for pitches that have a feminist angle, that have to do with women, obviously. We want something that is going to be a little bit counterintuitive, maybe, that will have a little bit of news, a news hook. You know, what's different from what I did at women's magazines often is that we are not heavily service oriented. We do have service in our stories, but a lot of our stories often start out, even our reported features, with a bit of a personal angle, and then we'll get into the experts and then circle back to the personal. Also, the editors, you'll hear our voices a lot on the site. So we're looking for feminist, funny, voicey, newsy. It can be global. Political is good.
And what about the actual pitch? Do you want to see the headline? Do you want to see a little nut graph? Do you want to see the experts? What are you looking for in the pitch to convince you?
Well, obviously, it has to grab me with the voice. You know, I'm also going to be looking for someone who has lots of good clips and experience. They, at the Persistent, will often say, I'm not sure this article has enough intellectual heft, which I like to joke and say, I get like a little endorphin ping whenever anyone says that, because when I used to work at women's magazines, I sometimes felt like things had to be dumbed down a bit and not to, especially at the end when they were trying to compete with Twitter. I don't want to disparage women's magazines, but it's nice to be hearing about intellectual heft. Like, intellectual is good, thought provoking, even angry sometimes, because there's a lot to be angry about. Everything doesn't have to have a happy ending. We like to use writers from all cultures and countries. So yeah, for the pitch, it doesn't have to be a long drawn out pitch. We don't have to go through all the experts you're going to use. It's more like, do I like the idea? A paragraph or two is fine. Then we will usually discuss it. We have twice weekly Zoom meetings. People are like, I'd like to read that, or, I've read too much about that, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a high bar, but again, writers who've been working and know the drill and have a voice could have some great opportunities. So that's wonderful. Can you tell me how many pieces you commission a month, a week?
We tend to do it in batches because we're a small group. So we will do it in batches. And then, well, we have 3 newsletters a week that go out. Each newsletter features a bigger piece, a reported piece or an essay or a Q&A or a riff. I can get into those types of things that we commission later. And then we have something called Elsewhere, which is a little roundup of news clips, and then something called One More Thing, which is a bit longer, but also kind of newsy. Those latter two things tend to be written by staffers, our writers. So we're running at least two new stories a week, if that gives you a sense of commissioning. We need to have enough stories for that. So let's say at least two stories a week. And sometimes more, sometimes 2 to 3 stories a week. And on Fridays, we do a column called You Might Like, which we ask contributors to contribute. It's the last one we did are books you would suggest for a book club because our audience really loves books.
What's the demographic of the audience?
Women of all ages, which is great for me. I mean, I am 62, and I am decades older than many of my colleagues. One of my colleagues is 35, another one just turned 40. And one thing I experienced a lot of, I feel like as I got older in the Condé Nast world, was some ageism, and I don't feel that at all there. They really want to hear from older writers. I don't feel like I'm treated any differently. That's part of what makes it my dream job.
And you work from home?
We all work from home.
That's one of the benefits that came out of the enforced isolation of the pandemic. People realized I can be effective from my home. I don't have to go in 5 days a week.
So hard to imagine now.
It really is hard to imagine. And the youth of today, they have it very different than other generations.
Easier in some ways, but I think harder too, in a way. I mean, I think it's isolating for them. I mean, all my closest women friends practically have come from women that I met on the way up in magazines. We were all assistants together.
I always used to say that, you could move so fast in publishing from assistant to editor. It used to be a very fit because you would just be ensconced in it. I mean, I used to stay till 9 at night, and I was the editor-in-chief of Woman's Own, and I was senior editor of American Woman, and I was editor-in-chief of magazines I launched, Body by Jake with Hachette.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was back in the 90s up till the early aughts.
There were two big earthquakes, 2001 and 2008.
Yes, yes. And that changed a lot. Everything changed a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's so wonderful about working at The Persistent from the perspective of someone who loves being an editor is I can work with really good writers. I can take the time to really bring the best out of them. And it doesn't feel like a churn in any way. I think so many digital properties are about the churn now. So it's just like it's a dream because it's being run by this one person and we can do whatever we want. Like imagine working with whatever your favorite writers, your favorite stories, your really nice colleagues, and there isn't this pressure of the advertising side. I mean,
That's wonderful. Yes. Sounds like a unicorn. Is there any publication out there that's competitive in some way?
well, I just discovered this other digital newsletter website called Provoked.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew it.
Yeah, and so that is explicitly for women 50 and older. And someone recently asked me if I wanted to write for it, and I was looking at it, and I think it's really excellent.
So, for a writer who wants to break in, I mean, clearly they have to know their craft. It sounds like they have to have bylines because there's a certain level that you're.
Well, we're also looking to bring along young, new writers. If they have good ideas and they are good writers, we will also bring along new writers And we're looking for that, and we are willing to work with writers to get their stories where they need to be if there's a really good idea there. We have a small staff, so it can take a little while to hear back about the pitches, and I don't mind at all when writers kind of bug me about it, and I'll just say, it's still on the table, but we're just a small group, and there is real respect for the writers in this team. And again, that is something I don't feel you get as often these days. It's not content producers and churning out. We really want to work with the writers to get their stories where they need to be.
Sure. And what about the word count, the rights?
So that brings me to what I started saying before. We are kind of doing 4 types of pieces or so. We do a shortish type of piece that we call a riff on something that someone has an idea or we have an idea and we want it turned around really quickly. Like it's often based on something happening in the news that we have an opinion about. For example, when Renee Good was killed in Minnesota by ICE, one of the founding writers named Emma Hazlitt, we were trying to figure out how can we cover Renee Good when everyone else is covering Renee Good? And she had this idea of that she was feeling the sense of real grief, even though she had never met Renee Good. And do we have the right to grieve someone we've never met? So she kind of wrote a small story on grieving, and it was really personal in her opinion, but I think it touched a lot of people. So we do these riffs, they're short-ish, like 650 words or so. And also short is we do Q&As with authors or playwrights, artists, that kind of thing. So those are short. On the short side, say 600 or so words, 600 to 800. We pay $400 for those. Then we have essays that are not reported. Those tend to be maybe 8 to 1200 words, or it could be up to 1500, but usually less than that. We pay $600 for those, and for reported pieces, we pay $800. And we do pay a kill fee. The contracts, we are very, if someone wants to use the work in their portfolio later or for a book or something else, they can. The rights can revert to them after a certain amount of time. It's just they can't immediately publish it somewhere else.
That sounds very reasonable and equitable. And yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's not the 250 or $2 a word that we were paying at the heyday, but I think right now the Times or the Atlantic, they pay like $250 for an essay or something. So I feel like we're not only are we right in there with the pay, but it's solid pay.
so the 400 goes for the interviews, the authors, playwrights, all that.
And a reported piece would be $800, 12 to 1500 words. So there's 3 levels. The 400 level are riffs and, short Q&As, then followed by essays are for $600, a little bit longer, and then $800 are reported pieces with some multiple sources.
No, that's great. That's really helpful. And how do you want people to submit to you?
They can write to me at my Gmail address if they want, which is pauladero@gmail.com. They can send to persistent people by messaging them on LinkedIn if they want. People are welcome to just pitch to me directly if they want. We are craving smart, counterintuitive, intellectual, cultural coverage, like of movies, of books, of pop culture. That's an area that I haven't had a ton of experience in. I have a few writers that I turn to, but I don't have the deep well of writers that I have when I'm looking for a reported piece or an essay. And so That would be a good way in. And again, like with a feminist angle, with a counterintuitive angle, we're really looking for that kind of thing.
Can you give an example of counterintuitive? It wouldn't be this, it would be this.
Well, we did a piece on the new Frankenstein movie, and instead of talking a lot about that movie, we talked about how come in all these remakes of Frankenstein and these adaptations of Mary Shelley's book, Mary Shelley's vision gets left out. This isn't what she wrote. This isn't what she thought. Why are men always doing it? It's like these are the women directors we wish would direct. So that would be an example.
So it's taking like tropes on their nose and turning things around and always with the feminist angle.
Yes.
Yes. And what about essays? Do you want them whole? Do you want them submitted, or do you want to pitch for an essay?
We will take pitches for us.
Okay, there is a big trend going on. Used to be editors only wanted to see the full essays, and now I've been hearing editors want to see pitches.
You're right. You're right about that. Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Because I feel like everything is so niche now in a way. Like every publication has its own thing. There are so many, so that for someone to write a whole essay top to bottom, it's really hard to nail what a particular publication wants. I'm completely riffing on that. I don't know if that's for sure, but that's what I would say.
It definitely is. I mean, back in the day, there were only a few TV stations, and then cable came, and it's the same thing, even though it's not like the big five like there used to be. There are littler publications. Some survive, some don't, but it proliferates. So there is opportunities out there. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily all well-paying or supporting of writers, but there are more places. That's what you're saying. So that people maybe have less time is my thought. It used to be you could read an essay and but maybe our attention span has changed so much since the 90s and 2000s because of online and social media. So maybe people just don't have the attention span anymore, even editors, because it's cultural. It's not just them.
Maybe. Yeah. That could be it. And also just the decisions are made quicker. That feels right. That doesn't feel right. You worked in these magazines and you know how long things could take.
So my final question to you is, what are your favorite stories that you've published?
Well, one of my favorite stories was a story that was written by someone on staff. It was called Gentle Parent. It was about the trend of gentle parenting. I unfortunately, like I don't have kids. I have stepkids. So I didn't even think I would be interested in this when the editor said, "Can you take this piece and edit it?" I hadn't assigned it. It was when I first started. And we ended up with the title that said, gentle parenting is gentle on everyone but the mothers who have to do it. And this writer, Emma Haslett, who she's British and she can be very funny and sarcastic even. And what I loved about this story was she just talked about how gentle parenting, which if you don't know what it is, it's kind of like meeting the child where they are and listening to them no matter what. And, there was an anecdote in this story where her kid just had a tantrum in the middle of the road and the expert said, oh, just be with them, take them to the side of the road and sit with them. And she was like, I have dinner to cook. I have work to do. It wasn't this typical earnest parenting piece, but more like, what the hell is with this crazy trend? I love that we have so many stories that are really trying to reach women where they're struggling and what they're pissed off about, but with a sense of humor that's going to make them laugh. We also recently did a story on how politically, moms are doing such a great job of organizing grassroots groups politically. Like there's a big group called Red Wine and Blue, and there are all these derogatory terms toward women now. Like we've always had like women are hysterical, they're shrews, and we had Karens. Now we have wine moms. Then when Renee Good was killed, awfuls, the awfuls. So we talked about the history of mocking women and trying to take away their power, and how people can mock us all they want, but we have the power and it's no joke. I feel like for a long time, you couldn't really say you were a feminist. People didn't really talk about feminism, or it wasn't cool to be feminist. And I don't, I'm a different generation where I grew up with feminism and Gloria Steinem, etc. And it just feels so nice to be working with these younger editors that are unapologetically feminist, unapologetically pro women, unapologetically smart and intellectual. And it's like, I've said it already, but it's a dream come true for me. And I think a really good opportunity for writers who want to stretch their intellectual and writing chops. We're really looking for good writing and fresh ideas, newsy, feminist, funny, fierce.
Well, that sounds wonderful. And anybody who gets your attention, gets noticed by their pitch or their essay or their idea, will have the opportunity to work with you, a traditionally trained editor from the very best, and taking them along with you on their editorial journey would be a dream for them. So thank you so much, Paula.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I mean, I think that the editor-writer relationship at its best is such a magical thing to go full circle. We were talking about magic at the beginning, and when that relationship works, it brings out the best in everyone.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.